Hello, everyone. It is Fiona here, and I'm back with my very good friend and colleague, Fernando. Would you like to introduce yourself, Fernando?
Yeah, my name is Fernando Raul, and I am here. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome, Fernando. And I really enjoy catching up with you so that I can understand more about the broad uh, base of astrology that is available and how it fits in with philosophy and how it fits in with truth over time. And we've had a chance to catch up um, on various occasions, and I have been fascinated by two concepts that you have mentioned to me. And today I wanted to make those the focus of our video. So I've noticed when we've been speaking that actually often we come back, you and I, to talking about the fire and the pedestal.
Yeah,
And I really wanted to make that front and center part of our conversation and hear why that's important to you and what your journey's been with that. Because I take it from the conversations we've had already that you're looking for the fire
yeah.
that is there in astrology. So maybe freely speak now about the fire and the pedestal analogy and how that relates to you to astrology.
Sure. So first of all, that analogy comes from a school of philosophy called the Perennialist School,
Okay.
whose major exponents are F. Schön, René Guénon, and others like Titus Burckhardt. It's the idea, basically, very briefly. It's the idea that all religions in the world have certain common themes, certain common topics that grant them the idea of being official, or grant them the idea of being the real wisdom, timeless wisdom. They call it Sophia Perennis, which is the idea of timeless wisdom. So the idea is that you want to go after that timeless wisdom in order to be connected to the real transcendence of spirituality and religion. And to a certain degree, all traditional religions have that to a certain degree. And from a traditional perspective, there were other institutions that also had them, schools of mystery, initiatic leagues, and that sort of thing. And that analogy comes from that. It's the idea of looking for those real things that bind all these systems of thought together and validate them as real. Because from that perspective, there is no subjective approach to reality and truth. There is truth. There is something that is objectively true, and that is the Sophia Perennis, and that's would be like the fire, right? That
Yes.
would be like the thing that you want truth, right? You're looking for truth because that is the real thing that you want, right? But
Yeah.
once again, the fire is not something that is always out there. It's something that becomes, or more correctly said, it's something that is burning something, or is something that is put upon something, and that is the idea of the pedestal. That is the idea
Yes.
of the wood. That is the idea of the fuel that fuels the fire. Even though that's a redundancy, but the idea is that the fire is in something. The fire depends on something to be, right. And that's the idea of the systems, or the institutions that have that fire, that promote it, that are dedicated that are dedicated to initiating people in order to be aware of it and study it, in that sort of metaphor, and sort of speaking, right. So the idea is that you want to go after that Sophia Perennis. You want to go after that truth.
Yes.
You don't want to go after the institutions per se, because some of these institutions are no longer valid in terms of where we're living, or they're no longer valid in terms of the society or the culture where we're living, because some of those are heterogeneous from other cultures, from other time periods. So that's where the idea comes from. So whenever you are trying to learn astrology, I mean, you have to seek out those real precepts that connect astrology to a larger picture. and avoid becoming something that you're not, or becoming something that is no longer there anymore. And that's the thing here, because we have to juxtaposition that to the reality of the place we're living in history, which is the modern world, in a place where all these institutions are no longer available, right? These religious institutions are no longer viable, or they're being corrupted by modernity. They're no longer initiatic leagues. They're no longer schools of mystery, that sort of thing. So we are living among ruins, right? We're living
Yeah.
not with a pedestal that no longer has fire, but we are living among ashes, right? So the idea is not to honor the ashes of the pedestal, but to look forward in order to look for that fire, and having it, and starting it from a small place, and becoming that germ that is going to bring forth the future, right? From that traditional perspective, because that's the thing. If you look for things that are destined to collapse, that are destined to be destroyed, or that are no longer viable, then you are not looking for that fire, right? You're just looking for the ashes. You're looking for the pedestal. You got to look for the ideas that connect you to that um, perpetual wisdom, that Sophia Perennis, in order to like be standing up, or being on your feet among the ruins, and not necessarily dreaming or presupposing that this thing is going to work now, or this institution is going to work now. For example, it's the idea that um, that I've met people of my generation of just being infatuated with Vedic culture, Sanatana Dharma, but more than that, being infatuated by certain organizations that promote that in the West, and they believe that today in the 21st century, going to an ashram and being part of this community is the way of becoming, or being, better said, a spiritual religious person. And most of them are just disillusioned with the fact that those forms, right, those pedestals, those institutions are no longer viable in the modern world. And that's the reality of the thing, especially after the 20th century, where man, or better said, that extraordinary man that has the sensibility to be aware that there's something deeply wrong with the system he lives in, is no longer does no longer have the luxury of having institutions that might help him achieve that perpetual wisdom, right? So that's the thing. We have remnants. We have astrology. We have certain things that have to do with magic, with alchemy. We have certain things that have to do with ancient philosophy, but we don't have institutions that promote that. So do not look for institutions. Do not look for groups of people. Do not try to um, reinvigorate, or bring back to life ancient institutions, because they no longer work in the modern world. You have to go inside, and you have to live the experience, and you have to, from that experience, start understanding this idea that wisdom is out there, but you have to look for it, right? And that's something that that is the root of all this myth busting, right? Of believing that there is like there is clean wisdom, or unadulterated wisdom, and that is the real wisdom, that is the real tradition, that is my real parampara. And that's not necessarily so, because in the modern context, all those things are just destroyed to a certain degree. And it's not because they were like destroyed like that. It's a process of several centuries, although in the East it took only a few decades, where these things are no longer viable. They're no longer easily available, or at least available to the person who is in that quest of looking for that wisdom. So it's a very philosophical conversation that we're having. But I bring that forth in astrology, and actually I came into astrology from that perspective. So And ever since then, as I told you before, I thought the real thing was in Vedic astrology, but then you realize it's not that simple. It's not black and white. It's really like shades of gray. So you gotta seek out and see what works, what doesn't work in terms of where things come from, right? And where these things used before, are they valid, are they in scripture? And that is basically the quest I'm in right now, in terms of just figure out what is going on in order to rekindle that fire, in order to have it and start from there, from 0 point, in order to make it grow and have something viable once again in the future.
Uh, Fernando, there's
I don't
just
know. I don't know
so
if I
much.
was.
That's
I don't know if you
wonderful.
understood what I tried to say,
Yes,
but
yes,
yeah,
I do. I do. But I also want to break it down a little bit now,
yeah.
because it's interesting when we've mentioned this analogy between ourselves a few times. And one of the things that has struck me that I took from those words was that sometimes, we obviously originally the fire was very beautiful, very useful. And I thought we put it on a pedestal, because it is so sacred and precious. And I can imagine like this, marble pedestal or something that the fire is on, and we worship the fire, um, and that over time, accidentally, we begin worshipping the pedestal. That all of the structures that have gone into sustaining that fire.
Oh no, actually it's not like that. No, it's not like that. It's the idea of the institutions that held that wisdom, that they're
Yeah,
no longer there.
yeah. So
It's
that's
it's
really,
it's 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 not that we started it's not that we started praying to the pedestal instead of the fire. No, it's that the fire is, it's not, if you don't have a torch or a pedestal, there's no
yeah,
fire. So
yeah,
there's that fire, there's no longer a place where you can look for it. So you have to seek out the different pieces among the ruins. It's not that modern man started praising the fire, the pedestal instead of the fire. Is that they destroyed everything. Right? So now that we're seeking it, people who are into tradition, and this is the thing, the people who are into tradition got to look for the fire instead of the pedestal, right? Try to look for the wisdom instead of the institutions, because the institutions no longer have the fire, right? Because
exactly.
they're no longer traditional, they are modern.
Yep.
They are not connected to that perennial wisdom. They're not connected to lineages that go back, although some people might say they are, but it's especially in India or in the East more than in the West. It's very difficult to really believe that. Now, I don't mean to say that everybody is a liar or a charlatan in terms of alluding to a lineage that goes back to centuries back, but probably they belong to certain lineages that go back a certain time. But the idea that they can connect themselves to like the beginning, I really doubt that, especially in the last 300 years more than anything else, especially in the East. In India, they went through two difficult periods. The Mughal invasion of the Islamists, which was horrible, and you can read the chronicles. They're really horrible things. And then obviously, the British colonization, and now you have that. The technocratic state of the modern Indian state of Bharat, or
Mm,
Hindustan, as they call it,
yeah.
traditionally speaking. But the idea is that the same thing you could say about China. China went from an empire to a global communist technocratic superpower in less than 100 years. And the Middle East, you have things there that are kind of more valid that in East in India or China, but that's another topic for another conversation. But the idea of idealizing the East and the Eastern traditions is something that you have to be very careful about doing, because once again, there are only ashes. So don't go after the ashes. If you are of a traditional mind and on a traditional outlook, go for the fire, right? And that's more difficult, because you have to have certain characteristics, a certain character, certain sensibilities in order to be able to differentiate what's real from what's not real, and at the same time have the capability of realizing that maybe what you had hold or what you held as real no longer is, because you have expanded your understanding of what things are and how things are functioning in the dynamics of the world we live in.
It's fascinating. So now I've got two questions for you to explore. One is, how do we seek that fire, and is it different for different people, like the process that you're speaking
Oh
about?
yeah.
And then what is the legacy that we have the capability to leave from this seeking? So let's start with.
Oh, I didn't understand that one. Can you repeat it?
So I take it from what you've shared with us today that without the institutions, it is the individual who
Yes,
seeks.
that's the first question, but the second one.
The second one is about, therefore, what is our role in creating a legacy, in creating the potential for this fire to be transmitted?
Okay, got it. Okay, the first thing you have to do is that you have to be very critical of other people. Especially in this guru culture that exists today in the East. Teachers are teachers. The guru culture that is very prevalent in India. It goes. It doesn't go a long way. You have to realize where to stop it, right? The thing is that you have to live your experience and you have to be highly critical. And the best way to seek this knowledge is going to the original sources. In these terms, we're referring to the original texts and start from there, right? And at the same time, learn from your own experience. And in the case of astrology, believe it or not, studying astronomy is very important also. That's something that usually most astrologers don't care to study about, but those three things are very important, because astrology, in the case of astrology specifically, not in other subjects, you can learn astrology either from books, from a guru, or from astronomy, and all those relate to your personal experience, right? So learn from gurus, but do not fall prey of this guru culture. uh Even though that might work in certain things, but in the case of astrology, I do not recommend the idea of the guru culture that most brahmacharyas or Vaishnavas fall into, specifically if they belong to certain organizations. uh, at the same time, be critical, and at the same time, from your own experience, go to the original texts. Go to the original text. And what are the original texts? What in Jyotish, the five principles, Brihad Jataka, Jataka Pariyata, Faladipika, Saravali, and Chivana Chintamani. You can go to Brihad Parashara Hora Shastra, but that's a problematic book. And also, Prashna Tantra, Prashna Marga, and also to a certain degree Yamini Upadesha Sutras. But Jaimini is problematic also. And from Hellenistic texts, go to the original ones. I mean, go to texts like the Tetrabiblius, the Pentateuch, or Carmen Astrologicum. Go to Menilus. I mean, go to the Perso-Arabs. I mean, go to all those, and do not take for granted what they say. Analyze it, compare it, compare techniques, compare terms. And as you can see, it's not as easy as some people think, because some people just want everything to be chewed and spit out into their mouths, right? I know that sounds kind of vulgar, but that's the idea of most, not of most, but of some people. Let's give the benefit of the doubt. And at the same time, in terms of having that legacy, is just you doing it from your experience, and starting small and being consistent in what you are trying to do, right? And you're gonna fall, you're gonna commit errors, because we're all humans. But try to be loyal to that principle, and try to be on your feet among the ruins of the world, and try to be on your feet, even though, well, people are going to go against you, institutions are going to go against you, because you are putting into question the validity of the whole system that predominates in the current world. So yeah, I think that's an approach, I could say, one can have in order to try to answer the questions you just asked me.
Yeah. And so do you see that people in, say, the generation before us, astrological generation before us, have done that, that they have gone and investigated these original?
Oh yeah, I mean it's going on, but the thing is that you have to realize that we're talking about the current world, which is a result of the 20th century, right? The idea of all the things that went out in the 20th century, but more than anything else, it's the result of the world in the Western context from the late 18th century till now, right? Now, previous generations, well, in terms of previous in the Western context, not in the Indian context, you have to go back, before the early modern age, which would be like 16th, 15th century, before that, in order to like try to assimilate to like a more traditional outlook on life. But ever since then, it's been a slow decline into what uh the academia calls modernity, but from a traditional perspective would be like the involution of the traditional perspective, which is very very curious, because what we see, or what the majority of the people today see as evolution or as progress, from the traditional perspective was always seen as decadence, right, as involution, because that's the idea of being and becoming, right? You're just being, so you are, right? And that's the traditional perspective. In the modern perspective, you're becoming. It's like, no, no, no. Tomorrow is going to be the revolution. No, 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 no. The day after tomorrow is going to be the revolution. You get there. No, no, no. The day after tomorrow, and that's the unending becoming that we are on, in terms of revolution after revolution after revolution after revolution after revolution, without really having a north, without really having a direction. Of course, there were wars before before now, right? But there was a traditional anchor that sustained society in terms of the old order, right? The old order of religion, and the church and the monarchies, but in our context, right? Which is the same more or less in other parts of the world, but with different cultural variations. But the idea is that now none of those things are there, which relate to a certain degree to the predictions that were given in the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Kali Yuga, right? And some people say we are in the Kali Yuga, right? Some people say we're in the Dwapara Yuga, but that's another topic for another moment. But the idea is that in that unending becoming, you're not being, right? And that's the crisis of the modern world we are in today. So that's something that people have to realize. We're talking about the context right now where we're living, right? Now, previous generations that lived in the 20th century, well, yes, I guess people did their work. I mean, they're not commonly known in terms of astrology. Right now, we are living a very important renaissance. I mean, Vedic astrology, or Jyotisha, which is the real name. I mean, Vedic astrology is like a modern term that came up in the 60s and 70s in order to sell this new product, But the idea is that Jyotish came into the West with strength after the 60s and 70s. Now we are bringing back to life the old traditions of the Hellenistics and the Perso-Arab, Islamics, and medieval and Renaissance astrology with translation projects that started in the 90s. So things are picking up, right? And that's why I'm here, because I'm a result of those things that happened in the past 30 years, right? To a certain degree, from my own small perspective and experience, and the small things I do within my work right now. So yeah, I guess people are reconstituting that tradition, reconstituting that fire, but slowly, because now we are basically in Pampers, right? We're babies. We're just trying to reconstruct something that was lost, or that is being recovered slowly, piece by piece. Uh, Through translations, because even though we might have the books, we don't have those institutions, right? We don't have the initiatic schools, we don't have the mystery schools. So who is going to teach us? It's like Lord of the Flies to a certain degree. We are just
Yes.
kids in an island, and we're trying to rebuild everything back, and that's the idea. We kind of have the elements of that fire, but we don't have those pedestals. So it's like, what can we do? We need to get to the fire in order to start building the apparatuses that are going to give us that pedestal, right? But the idea that we can take pedestals from the past and put them in the modern context, well, that's not going to work. and that's mainly something that I alluded previously. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then, from your perspective and in your experience, critical analysis and that keeping that critical objectivity towards the teaching
Yeah.
is the tool that's been most useful for you.
Yes, especially when you realize the dichotomy between modernity and tradition, and at the same time, all the new age stuff, theosophical stuff, psychological stuff, and spiritist stuff that can get into the traditional teachings of astrology, which are all things that came up from the 19th century till now. And you have to separate the grain from what's the name of that expression?
The wheat from the chaff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have to separate that because uh you have to realize that many things that pass as Vedic astrology today is really modern astrology. At the same time, there are a lot of things in modern astrology that are modern, but people who study modern astrology believe that it's astrology per se because they don't have the context. So it would be to a lesser degree what we're saying with the Vedic stuff. So that's very important because that's the real thing. You know, that's a real I don't want to say menace, but that's a real problem. Because in the end, you start studying astrology, but you're not studying astrology, you're studying something else, right? That goes by the name of astrology. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to you have to make a living and all that and that sort of thing, but if you are in this I don't want to say quest because that sounds so melodramatic, but if you are in this personal search for meaning and truth, then that is not the way to go, because those things um are not do not pertain to the traditional world, because those things are not um perpetual. They change, and they're going to change. I mean, these things do change, and they stem from the principle that unending change and evolution and progress is the zeitgeist, when that is not traditional, and that is not organic to the way man manifested himself organically throughout history until 20 to 200 years since 200 years ago, more or less. So yeah, that's something, and it's something that some people understand, other people do not necessarily understand, or if they understand it, they are very abrasive to it, because it puts into question a lot of principles that are very important today, like liberty, like equality, like fraternity, and other stuff that we're not going to get into because it's very polemic, it's very controversial.
Well, but I want to also, there's a whole lot there that I want to talk to you about in another video. But tell me, we've just highlighted critical analysis and that objective perspective as being really important. And as you were speaking throughout the video today, I hear that dichotomy of the third house and the ninth house, the ninth house of accepting a teacher and the third house of learning by doing and experimentation.
Yeah.
But I also hear what planetary energies would you attribute to critical thinking? Because when I was listening to you earlier, I was thinking that there's a way of finding truth that maybe it's a Venus kind of energy around that one feels truth in one's soma or in one's being.
Yeah.
But so let's have a conversation about anything from third house, ninth house dichotomy through to our analysis, critical analysis, which I don't know if you're picking Mars, Jupiter, Moon, I don't know, energy, and Venus. Tell me about the planets and astrological concepts that are our strengths for finding the fire.
Yeah, I mean, you can't change, but let's start from the beginning. I mean, you can't change your chart.
Yes.
Okay, so you gotta accept your chart. That's it. So people who have debilitated planets in cadent houses, bad aspects, that sort of thing, you can't change that. So you gotta accept that, and that's the reality of things. So you have to approach these sort of astrological questions from that perspective. That doesn't mean that free will doesn't exist. That is false. That doesn't mean that destiny is absolute. No, what you do is that you accept those things, you accept your destiny, and you work within it with
Yeah.
your free will. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the idea of the dichotomy of the third and the ninth house, there is a dichotomy, but in my opinion, it's a small one, because from the traditional perspective, both that axis relates to spirituality to a certain degree, and it does through either the idea of formalized religion, travel, the prevalent dogmas, the prevalent viewpoints, Weltanschauungs that you have in society, which would be the ninth, and the third that relate more to the action, your will, your experience, and how these things are not necessarily opposite, but they complement each other.
Yes.
But there are other things, there are other things that differentiate them. For example, long trips, small trips, short trips, and long trips. Also, the idea of like familiarity of people, the third, like cousins, brothers, even neighbors. While the ninth is the formality of people you meet, gurus, teachers, people who know. At the same time, in traditional astrology, other than Jyotish, the ninth has to do a lot with astrology, and more than the eighth. And at the same time, the third has to do a lot with kindred, with siblings, and not only with people who are your brothers, but people who are your contemporaries more than anything else. While the ninth has to do with people who are not necessarily your contemporaries, but that said, you realize that axis has to do a lot with spirituality. Now, in terms of the critical thinking, obviously Mercury is the most important planet for that. The dynamics of your intelligence, right? But all planets are critical. All planets have their critical attitude, right? So that will depend on the dignity of the planet. You know, I mean, actually, I think that each planet, even though they reign different things, the quality of the dignity of the planet will predetermine if they are indeed, uh, capable of dealing with the things that come up, right? So the premise is, if you have good dignity planets, that then you will probably be more critical, especially if you have a very well dignified Mercury. Now, Mercury, as I told you before, is fools people, because people believe that the Mercury in Pisces is bad, but in my experience, the accidental dignity of Mercury sometimes is more important than the essential dignity. By that I mean, what its relation to this to the houses, and also what's its relation to the sun more than anything else, than where it is in the chart in the zodiac, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I can say in terms of critical thinking. Now, Mars also has to do a lot with will. So even though critical thinking might not be there, or is there, will is also a very important planet. I mean, will is a very important thing, and Mars is a very important planet for that.
Yeah.
So, Mars also has to do with that, but in a sense, all planets have to do with it.
Yes.
Saturn has to do with the work you put in, the discipline, the patience, the results that you will get in the long run. Venus has to do with the capability of diplomacy, of understanding, of being satisfied and knowing when to stop, when to start, that sort of thing. The sun has to do with your identity, your essence, being true to yourself, and being able to recognize, I'm being critical, I have will, I have the power, I got to do this. And the moon has to do with your personality, your soul mind, the person you become during this incarnation, and those types of sensibilities that are very important in order to function. That has to do a lot with Venus, the other female planet, and obviously Jupiter, the idea of being able to achieve wisdom, the ability to just be in bliss, not necessarily happy, but in bliss, and satisfied with your higher goals, right? And besides that, I mean, I mentioned all the planets. So yeah, I think that's a brief summary of what I can say.
Yes, but it's good. It's good to hear that perhaps what I'm taking away from the conversation that you've just summarized is that we're looking for balance on that third nine dichotomy, or
Oh yeah.
or
And at the same time, they're cadent houses. So, cadent houses are not good in terms of giving power, right? So that's why I think that axis relates to spirituality, because you go within, you go to an inner search, right? If you have the moon in the third and the sun in the ninth, and or I mean both or either one of them in these positions, so those are very good positions. But to have other planets there, it can be difficult, especially if you have the moon in the ninth or the sun in the third. That can bring difficulties. But if you have the moon in the third, the sun in the ninth, those are very good positions. And also, if you have Mars in the third or Jupiter in the ninth, those are also good positions. But those houses are not, from the traditional perspective, good for giving power to those planets. Hence, you have that inner search, that spirituality, power in terms of manifestation more than anything else. Although inner manifestation might be there without a doubt.
Yes, but maybe we say to those astrologers who are on this journey of seeking out the fire that we're looking for balance between blindly following a guru, being surrendered to the traditional or the old knowledge or what we've been taught, and blindly following experimentation. We're looking for balance there, and that all planets are helpful, but perhaps it's good as an astrologer to remember one's Mercury and the objectivity that it brings to the critical mind. So good takeaway points.
Yeah, I mean, the idea here is that you're alone and your experience is very important, and that you have to remain on your feet. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, fascinating. All right, so we finally got to talk about the fire and the pedestal, and I look forward to the next time that we get together and talk about another philosophical concept that we've touched on before. So thank you so much, Fernando.
You're welcome, and thank you for inviting me, Fiona, once again.
You're welcome.